This is why there are words. You get to try them out here. And I know you're going to have a lot of practice soon when that book comes out after you, whittle about 400 pages out of it? I had to do that once. It was a good exercise. I'm so glad to hear something about India because I've heard Bob sing about his experiences over there and to hear it in the book. I can't wait for this to come out. We'll have to have a repeat performance with the book actually here. Okay, next. I've told you not anything about the order of this, so you're as surprised as I am. Mary Helen Specht. She and I met at, Jane is going, oh, thank God. It's not me. I met Mary Helen at the Dobie-Paisano ranch. I was the leaving fellow. She was the arriving fellow. This was 2008. And I guess I was the last person at that ranch when it had been exactly as J. Frank Dobie had left it, which meant that there was still a shed in the back with the remnants of a longhorn in it that my dogs were carrying out to the front of the front yard on a daily basis. And there was a little photography studio in the back, and when I left, they decided to remodel it. So I think, Mary Helen, you got to be on sort of the transitional phase of the new improved Dobie-Paisano when they actually had reliable water flow possible. But at any rate, Mary Helen had a wonderful book come out, Migratory Animals, that was an editor's choice by the New York Times Book Review and the Austin American-Statesmen. And she's currently teaching at St. Ed's Creative Writing Department here in Texas. And she was named by Texas Monthly as one of 10 writers to watch. So please welcome Mary Helen Specht.
To Malvern. In addition to our lovely books over here, you can also have the best poetry selection in town. So I really encourage people to go home with some extra books in your bag. So because of the theme that Allison told me when she asked me to come was close calls, and I just thought, the brand new book that I've been working on, I just kind of started. The opening chapter would be good for this theme, but of course it's kind of vulnerable to read something that's brand new. And then I got here and I was like, oh, this was a really stupid idea because there's like musicians in the house, and there's musicians in this chapter, and I haven't really done a lot of the research yet, so you guys can give me some pointers afterwards in terms of some fixes. So this is just the beginning chapter of my new project, and set in Burning Man. Not the book. The book is not set in Burning Man, just the opening chapter. I think most people are familiar with Burning Man. It's kind of an intense, temporary community building. It's not really a festival. In the middle of the desert, thousands of people show up with costumes and music and all kinds of things. Okay, so that's kind of where we are here. Dusk. Pastel light refracted by clouds of fine white sand, everything bathed in a golden halo. Maybe Black Rock Desert was better in photos than in real life, because even with the steampunk goggles and hand-woven scarf, Ginny Sweet felt under attack by beautiful dirt, digging into wherever cloth touched skin, fusing with the membranes of her lungs and eyes, muffling the sound of the amp into which was plugged her favorite Les Paul, and the thirst. She had never drunk so much water in her life. In the distance, luminous objects stood against the dying sky. A bombed-out temple tiered like a gilded wedding cake, filigreed in silver and gold. A white cylinder of enormous prongs like the rib cage of a whale. a 2-story Doc Marten boot attached to a clothesline. Was it for the old woman who lived in the shoe, the one with all the children? The temperature was dropping like a sigh of relief. Ginny looked for her daughter to see if anyone had thought to put a jacket on her. Of course not. There she was by the edge of the makeshift stage, twirling cords of glowing neon plastic with one of the roadies. Ginny finished tuning her guitar before clicking it back into the stand. This gig, if you could even call it that, had been Langston's idea, to promote their new album with a surprise set at Burning Man. To Ginny, it seemed like a lot of trouble for a show with no tickets, no take. The crowd hadn't recognized them yet. Everybody else on the playa dressed more like rock stars than they were. Nico, she pointed to her daughter's backpack near the tower of bottled water they'd packed in with them. Hoodie, please. Her daughter frowned, clearly not wanting anything to cover up the sequined dance costume she insisted on wearing. A man climbed the stage, microphone feedback, reverb. Across the way, Langston was signaling something to her. They would have to go on soon. The man was apparently introducing them to a surprised and quickly gathering hive of desert people. Ginny found the candy apple red noise-canceling headphones and nestled them onto Nico's ears. On stage, she took her place between Langston and Patrick. They didn't have a frontman per se, but people liked to see a woman at the center, a little TNA, a little window dressing. Though Ginny tried not to think of it that way, dressed as she was in a plain t-shirt and billowy tie fisherman's pants. Plus, she played the guitar like a killer, didn't she, and wrote some of the songs. They were an indie band that over the years had somehow been elevated into a small amount of fame. They weren't so young anymore, and neither were their audiences, but they were still fucking cool. In fact, that's what people said when they spotted her or Langston on the street. Fucking cool, man, fucking cool. And that's what the burners were saying now as they yelled and swarmed, kicking up dust until their glittery faces and writhing bodies were obscured by it. Fucking cool, man, it's the menagerie is right there. The acoustics were shit, and Ginny didn't even want to think about what the sand was doing to the equipment. It was like playing a concert in a dust storm. There was something surreal about the lines of tents in the distance, like the desert base of a post-apocalyptic warlord. Temporary community building. That's what people called it, and Ginny couldn't help roll her eyes. How people spent days in the line of cars just to be in the heat and sand and thirst with thousands of other people. Despite their music's modest success, she liked to think of them as an art house band. The goggles Ginny wore blocked her peripheral vision. She was suddenly her father, who spent one summer driving without a windshield, just goggles between him and the road ahead. She was a kid looking through a cardboard tube of a roll of paper towels, or maybe through a kaleidoscope, colors shifting and glimmering into arrays of stained glass. It didn't feel like Ginny was performing at all, but rather she was the audience watching everything happen. A beautiful inversion, an unleashing and a letting go. Stepping down from the stage platform was disorienting. The noise around them echoed, and Ginny struggled to find her guitar case, tripping over a snake of cords. She shivered and looked around for her leather jacket. Her skin stretched tight across her neck and cheekbones. Her lips cracked and bled. Then Langston was beside her, and she angled her head for a kiss, but instead he leaned into her ear. Where's Nico? Ginny turned toward the steps and the undulation of roadies and fans. No candy apple red headphones, no purple hoodie. Did you lose her? Asked Langston, an edge to his voice. Lately, he was so quick to annoy, to blame her. You mean, did we lose her? Instinctively, they circled the stage in opposite directions, checking in with their crew, shaking off people who tried to stop them or pat them on the shoulder. Surely Nico was here somewhere, underfoot as always. Ginny crouched to her daughter's height and tried to see through the weave of milling people in the desert night. She and Langston met up again on the other side of the stage. George says he saw her talking to a monarch butterfly. Ginny tried to process this. What? You know, some lady dressed up like an effing butterfly. Ginny looked around. In this place, that wasn't a particularly helpful description. Okay. They enlisted their crew, everyone fanning out in search of the missing girl. Ginny remembered getting lost in the grocery store as a kid, the fear of a disappearing mother. Burning Man was no grocery store. What a place to lose your kid. Ginny tried to see the surroundings through the eyes of a 5-year-old. Flames shot up, lighting up arcs of night sky. fire twirlers. Maybe they had lured Nico away, she thought, moving in that direction, passing a phalanx of revelers, naked bodies covered in gold paint and elaborate feathered headdresses, people sporting leather jumpsuits and superhero costumes and furry boots. She picked her way through the semicircle of people surrounding the fire twirlers whose muscular bodies glistened as they kept the flaming balls at the end of thick chains swirling in circles and figure eights. But no Nico, no little girls in the circle of light. Ginny tasted coppery adrenaline in the back of her throat. That frantic anxiety she first experienced 5 years earlier when she looked down at her jeans and thought, did I pee myself? Please God, tell me I just peed myself. But no, her water had broke, despite the fact that it was too early, despite the fact that the teacher in their birthing class claimed one's water rarely broke before contractions started, just in the movies. Despite the fact that at the time she was standing in the wings waiting to go on stage for a gig. Motherhood arrived like a slap in the face, like a bad dream, a car with a brake that suddenly got out. Of course, it was important to Ginny that she transform this narrative for Nico, to whom she always told, you just wanted to join the party early. You were ahead of your time. Now, as she searched for her missing daughter, she thought, maybe I shouldn't have made reckless independence sound so romantic. She crossed the playa, weaving through illuminated bikes, spokes clattering, riders snaking through the dark on their way to various parties and art installations and bars lit up in the distance. The next kid-friendly attraction Ginny spotted was a grove of luminous palm trees. As she got closer, she saw it was a dance party with a DJ spinning beats in one corner and enormous light bright in another. And the white glow of the fake neon trees, a sexy cowgirl danced with a sexy samurai warrior. A robotic-looking woman in a chrome corset did the moonwalk. A Tibetan monk shook his booty. So many dilated pupils, it was like being at a 90s rave. And no Nico, no daughter. Ginny cupped her hands over her mouth and asked the bartenders if they'd seen a little girl. They shook their heads in the negative, expressions sympathetic but uninvolved. But Ginny had never been the sort of famous to attract mobs. She was accustomed to knowing looks from passersby or shout-outs of, love you, Ginny, sweet, or subtle but not so subtle selfies taken from nearby restaurant patrons. But it was nice to be in a place so crazy that she was no kind of spectacle. In the NICU, after Nico had been born, a crisis also made you just like any other parent. The nurses didn't care who you were because the tiny babies were the rock stars of that place. What Ginny remembered was the struggle of trying to pick up their pink, wrinkly baby from the plastic warming bed without disrupting the tubes and sensors that connected to various parts of her body. Stripping off her shirt behind the thin curtain, Ginny held Nico to her naked chest, kangaroo care, they had called it, thinking, you shouldn't be here yet. You should still be inside of me. This was also what Ginny chanted to herself now as she picked up her pace, practically running toward a group of people spinning illuminated hula hoops on gyrating hips. Sure, the smallest one was Nico. Hey, she said, reaching out to her hooded daughter, disrupting the hoop which wobbled to the ground. But no, it wasn't Nico. It was a woman. I'm sorry, said Ginny, flustered. I thought you... And she didn't bother finishing before starting out again, more panicked now. Surely kidnappers wouldn't consider a Burning Man a prime target, but still, anything could happen. That was the horror of parenthood. Anything could go wrong at any moment. I'm looking for a woman in a butterfly costume and a little girl. She began stopping and asking anybody she came across, have you seen a woman in a butterfly costume, maybe with a kid? They shrugged and looked at her blankly, probably thinking, what kind of mother loses track of her child at a place like this? What kind of mother? What kind of mother? What kind of mother? Look, I understand what you're saying, but can you please not use the word costume, said a man dressed in what Ginny would describe as cyberpunk. Excuse me? A costume is what you wear when you're dressed up as someone else. At Burning Man, we wear uniforms or outfits. We are dressing up as under-supported parts of ourselves, but Ginny didn't stick around to hear the rest of the lecture. The road she was on must have been moving away from the playa because she started to see residential camps with small groups of people chatting and playing music. She turned around to make her way back to the center where it was denser with light and activity. As she jogged along, she heard the sound of crying, her chest tightening in automatic response. She followed the sound to where someone was sitting in the dust next to a bike. An androgynous chrome robot was crumpled and weeping. The robot looked up at Jenny with pleading eyes. I feel so alone. Having confirmed the crying wasn't coming from a child, Jenny stood up to leave. She felt a flash of anger that someone could be upset at something so banal as being alone when she had lost her fucking kid. And Jenny wasn't crying in the middle of the road, not yet. She heard the voice of the social worker who visited them in the NICU and said, pain has a way of filling up whatever room there is. They later found out that the social worker's child had been significantly more premature than Nico, and this had been her way of saying pain was pain. You couldn't compare hardships. Jenny felt the phone vibrate in her pocket. Lurching heart, held breath. The message from Langston said they'd found her. They would meet back at the trailer. Suddenly, all she felt was thirst. She was thirst, maybe thirstier than she'd ever been in her entire life. She stopped at a bar for water and drank, gulped, refilled, and began again. There was a shimmery quality in the air around her, revelers moving in slow motion, sounds muffled. When she got to the trailer, Jenny felt there was something off about Nico. The girl was lolling her head onto Langston's lap, eyelids fluttering. There you are, said Jenny with a forced lightness. She vowed to protect her daughter from the extent of her fear and worry. Paralyzing vigilance was not what she wanted for her. Here I am, she answered in a sing-song voice. Nico and her father were tangled together. They looked like such family. Nobody would ever question his paternity. It was Jenny who was the odd one out, the pasty, colorless one, her creeping gray hairs only further bleaching her already pale hair. Because she was white, nobody assumed Jenny was the nanny, though plenty of people, when they saw them alone together, probably wondered if Nico was adopted. George found her outside someplace called the Temple, said Langston, lips tight. Jenny nodded and sat beside them, insinuating herself into their web of limbs, pulling up the quilt. Did you have an adventure? She asked. Scavenger hunt, said Nico. Her voice was strange, lilting in a way it didn't sound normal. Well, what did you find? Asked Jenny. Scavenger hunts were one of their family rituals, a way for them to keep Nico entertained when they were on tour. The funny tasting cookies. Langston set up with a start. What funny tasting cookies? Some ladybug gave me cookies. They looked like chocolate chip, but they tasted weird. Like herbs? Kind of. Langston was up, charging out the flimsy door. Jenny could hear her husband as he raged outside. George, do you know what they gave her? The sound trailed off as he moved away from their trailer. What's Daddy doing? Jenny wondered how long it would take for the adrenaline to cycle through her body, if she would be able to sleep. Nothing particularly helpful. She curled around her daughter like a shrimp. They both smelled ripe. Mama, I'm thirsty. Jenny found a bottle of water and helped her daughter tilt it back. And as always, she wished she had more to give. Because she was born early, Nico was only placed on Jenny's chest for a quick moment before being spirited away to another part of the hospital. And she'd wondered whether this lack of immediate physical contact would affect their connection, would prevent their bonding. Later, Jenny would wrap the baby against her chest and carry her around the house like expensive cargo, leaking milk and raw love over everything. In those days, Nico woke starving, instantly opening her pink mouth to cry. She was full of want, hunger, thirst, and Jenny rushed to satisfy her, hoping it boded well for how her daughter would take life into her hands like ripe fruit and bite